Welcome to the Schmoeville podcast, a podcast that celebrates our Schmoes, the Schmoes Know, and the Collider video sort of umbrella that everything falls under. My name is Ryan Snelling. I missed you guys. I didn't plan on taking a vacation last weekend. I had planned for a guest to come on, and, just a couple days went by and we couldn't make it work, and then I just decided, hey, why don't I take a break? The gang is at Comic-Con. They're sort of taking a break from the traditional weekend or live show mostly, but they took their own sort of vacation, so I decided to take one too. And Christian said if I do it again, I will be removed from this podcast, but that's okay. We're here, we're back, and this is going to finish up the series that we've been doing the past few weeks. First, it started off with Brian Fernandez. We came on here to talk about how we can help as fans grow these brands, the Schmoes Know YouTube channel, the Collider YouTube channel. Then Michael K came on. We had an even further discussion as to what the Schmoes can sort of do to help promote their channels. So this is sort of the last episode in the series. Probably not going to be the last time we talk about this on this podcast, but this is going to be the last time we really focus on this for now. So I wanted to change it up. I wanted to bring somebody in that basically was not a fan of Collider, was not a fan of Schmoes Know, someone from the outside looking in to sort of examine who we are as fans, examine who these people are as, professionals in this movie review space. And the best person that I could think of was none other than one of my best friends. Don't challenge that, Jay. Jaye Williams. That was an exhausting intro, but hello, Jay. Welcome to the Schmoeville podcast.
That's me, J to the A to the Y to the E.
Yeah. In
the Schmoeville space, also the creator of the logo that I'm not sure is even being used anymore.
The logo is being used. It's every week, guys, if you subscribe to the SK Podcast YouTube channel, when our podcast goes up, that red and blue logo was created by Jaye Williams right here. So
absolutely. Still waiting for the check. Mark, Christian, if you're listening to this.
Still waiting for the check?
Yeah, I mean, you could have cut some money from the check that you normally get for this podcast. So.
Right. You might want to talk directly to Ellis, because I don't think Christian has any idea who you are.
Well, when I talked to him, all he wanted to do was buy drugs from me. So.
That's right. For those of you who don't know, I made this video for the SK Podcast YouTube channel. It's called Ryan Snelling Honorary Schmo, and it's up now if you haven't seen it yet. But I got to see Ellis in Cincinnati a couple months back. Jay is the person who not only appeared in the video, but he also drove me there. I convinced him at the last minute to drive me to Cincinnati.
I did. My involvement in this podcast is more than you would know. I'm like, I don't know. Is there like some sort of, Emperor Palpatine of Collider that's just behind the scenes? Because that's kind of what I feel like I am with this podcast.
You're the Emperor Palpatine of the Schmoeville podcast?
Yes.
And is that why you talked about taking over off air a few minutes ago?
Yeah, pretty much. It's my goal to take over every podcast.
You're trying to take over Film Beef. You're trying to take over the Schmoes Now.
Who would be my Death Star? That's the question.
I don't know.
Phil?
Your Honda Element.
Phil is my Death Star.
No one knows who Phil
sorry.
is. You got to get out of the Film Beef bubble. We're in the Schmoes bubble
Gotcha.
now. So yeah, Jay, I want to talk about. Well, let's step back a little bit. So we've been podcasting for a while, and guys, you've heard me talk about like the past year or so. I've been deeply involved with Collider, and then that kind of moved into me being involved with Schmoes Know, or at least watching these things. And Jay has sort of been along for the ride the whole time. He knows a lot about sort of how I discovered these channels and what I'm a fan of. And over the past year, I think you've heard me ramble about Collider and Schmoes Know, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the fact our friendship in general is a creative one. We're both podcasters. We bounce ideas off one another. And when you got this gig, we talked about it and kind of ironed some things out a little bit. And yeah, that's pretty much how it works.
My journey for the Schmoeville podcast is also well documented on your own podcast, which I will let you plug before we get out of here for sure. But you know a lot about my past year with Collider and Schmoes Know. You've gotten to know sort of Christian and Mark indirectly, aside from just meeting Mark. I mean, just tell me a little bit about how you felt about all this stuff before the assignment that I gave you this week. Before I told you that you were going to come on Schmoeville and discuss the programming. Tell me sort of what you saw from your perspective.
Yeah, well, from a content creator in general, your discussion along with some of our other friends who are kind of in the movie space, in the movie spectrum, I pretty much wanted to just dive into it out of curiosity even before you asked me to do this. Just kind of check it out. I'm a huge fan of what I call new media, which is essentially YouTube content and podcast content. So yeah, I wanted to check out what the Collider and the Schmoes and all of that, kind of what it was about. And I watched a few things on my own merit. I had some knowledge of Mark even before all of that because he's in the LA comedy scene. I think he did some stuff with Joe Rogan and Brian Redband, who I'm a big fan of, on the Death Squad podcast. So I knew who he was even before that. So.
Right. And throughout the past year, like you said, you've come up with, or you've told me out of nowhere, Harry, I actually watched Movie Talk today for once, and I always thought that was kind of funny because you never seemed, not to speak on like the quality of the Schmoes programming, but you never just seemed, you're not the biggest movie fan, so you never really. You never really were supposed to be a fan of this stuff. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It always surprised me when you were like, oh, hey, by the way, I listened to this. And you would have your own opinions on like Christian and Mark already before I even gave you your assignment. So do you want to include all those thoughts into where we're going into next, or do you want to speak on that before we move forward?
I'll touch on it just a little bit. I mean, I'm just fascinated with creativity in general. Mm-hmm. So actually creating a show like theirs is fascinating to me because what they're doing is they're taking a pre-existing format or model. You know, the tagline is the Sports Center of movies, and to see them do that in a professional capacity on YouTube is fascinating to me. So, you know, having a kind of a critical eye and also just kind of seeing what they're doing in the same way a director might watch somebody else's movies to see the different takes and different aspects of what they're doing. So yeah, that's pretty much all it was.
Well, if you just wanted to talk about Christian and Mark, like, it's the fascinating part is how they were just schmoes. They were nobodies, and then they sort of they involved themselves with Collider. Now they pretty much run the damn thing. I think that's the part of the journey that is most fascinating.
Well, in my opinion, that's the predictable aspect of it all, is the fact that they were able to do that. Because if you look at the trend of things on YouTube in general, the individuals and their individual characters are what carry YouTube channels.
Yeah.
You know, you look at people like PewDiePie, obviously one of the biggest YouTubers in the game, people like Chris Stuckman,
right?
You know, individuals and their characters, they're the ones that succeed the most. So it wasn't surprising to me at all to see them kind of transition over into that role.
Well, let's actually talk more about Christian and Mark real quick, because we're gonna sort of get into the stuff with Collider that doesn't always involve them. Like once we talk about Heroes and Nightmares, where they're gonna be kind of on the back burner. So let's talk about Christian and Mark and sort of your impression of theirs, and speak on their abilities or just your opinions on them in general. What do you see, or what do you think about when you hear Christian Harloff and Mark Ellis?
It's funny because just knowing Mark, his background in comedy, and the little bit that we did get to talk to him at the show that we saw him at,
right?
You know, comedians, they're very creative people, very artistic people. They're almost living, breathing personas of their art. They almost have to be on 24/7, especially when a camera's on. And I could tell that Mark is the guy who's willing to kind of go off track from time to time. And Christian is obviously the guy that kind of keeps things in line, so to speak.
Okay.
I want to talk more about that when we get into the actual Schmoes Know show episode.
Yeah. Okay.
But that's very apparent, and I can relate to that because, you know, in the other podcasts that I do one with my best friend, and having those two dynamics is great for entertainment. I also know how difficult it can be from both sides. One side wanting to go out in the ether, and one trying to keep things on track.
And what's fascinating about those two is that, like you, I saw sort of myself in Christian more so than Mark when it comes to like what I do for Film Beef. And what's amazing about them, and I even tried to get it out of them when I talked to them on here, is that I wanted to hear, like, tell me some of the bad stuff. Like, let me know that you guys aren't so special, you know what I mean? And of course, he didn't dive into specifics, but of course he said, that he had a hard journey, whether we really see it or not. So,
well, I think one thing that comes from doing it as long as they've done it is, after a while, you learn how to get through the hard times.
Right.
So, everybody goes through those rough points in relationships. It sounds like they're married. They might as well be.
They might as well be married.
Yeah. But you kind of learn how to get through the annoying period where Christian doesn't put away his dirty socks and Mark doesn't flush the toilet after he takes a poop.
What do you think their strengths are as host?
Well, I think Christian specifically, we've talked about this before, but the thing that struck me the second that I watched it, now I analyze a lot of media in general. I'm a telecommunications major and a media studies major in college. So there's a clear difference between what people look for on standard traditional television and from new media, especially on YouTube. You see that sometimes where a TV personality comes across on the internet and people can pick up on it almost immediately. It doesn't feel honest. It doesn't feel genuine. And Christian, I think, maybe it's because he's been doing YouTube for so long, but he has obviously got that tone down, the way to speak to the internet audience. I think that's great.
Yeah, I agree completely. And are you speaking more towards, like, it just doesn't sound like, well, they don't have a teleprompter, but it doesn't sound like they've been written for. You know what I mean?
There's a specific way that people talk on television. They're almost not talking to the audience. They're talking to the advertisers or whoever it is. But he's, especially in the actual Schmoes Know show that I watched, he has no problem talking to his fan base. He knows his fan base and the people that support his show. There's no problem with him doing that, and that's what's key.
Have you seen enough to have like an opinion on how they are with their fans? And obviously, I guess you could, aside from the obvious, like, hey, I was a fan and now I'm doing this podcast for them. So aside from that obvious, like, what's sort of been your experience with them and their fans?
Without getting too into my overall thoughts of it, maybe we'll journey down that later, but the Schmoes Know show is 100% developed for fans. I mean, it's almost, in my opinion, it's almost impossible for anyone new outside of that universe to actually watch it without being detached to a certain extent. And I think that's definitely commendable. I think that's perfectly fine for them to do that because, a fan base wants to be served, and they're doing that greatly.
Right. I've said that before. I think I even said it on last week's episode where I feel the same way for sure. I'm sure plenty of people have come in purely through the live show, but I agree. I think that's sort of what you discover, whether you're brought in by Movie Talk or one of their movie reviews or whatever. I feel like the live show is like there for the fans instead of a tool to bring in new fans.
Well, this exercise was almost perfect for me to experience that because the fact that the live show is at the end of the week and it kind of caps off the entire week of Collider-based content, even though it's not on Collider. Watching everything that I watched, it was nice to have this at the very tail end of everything because I knew everybody. I knew the cast of characters involved in the universe, and we're talking like it's fiction, but it's I mean that's kind of how I felt, but that's almost the only way that it can be done.
In my opinion, that's a very good point, and I don't know if we were ever going to touch on it later on, but that's a good point. It was sort of like that was all a warm up for when, like, the Schmoes Know show is the one that's probably the most personable, obviously, and that's when everyone is allowed to sort of breathe a little bit. It's got less structure. Everyone has their moment. Everyone's able to be themselves, and it's not as produced to say something on Collider. So I didn't even realize that throughout the entire week you got to know all these personalities, and then you were ready to see them do something really special on the live show.
I knew who John Schnepp was besides seeing him.
Well, he wasn't on the live show, but I know what you mean.
Yeah. Besides seeing him as Steve Brule, that's
that's not who that is.
It's not?
You thought John Schnepp was Steve Brule? That's John C. Reilly.
I know who it is. You idiot. What the hell's wrong with you? I got to know who, obviously, Josh McCouga was, which is weird for me to even say these names.
Because you hear me talk about him all the time?
Yeah, exactly. It was, who else? Who else did I talk about a lot? Well, the new guy, Brett
Sheridan.
Brett Sheridan. I have some sort of pre-existing knowledge from I guess his L.A. comedy stuff.
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe just because I'm such a big fan of Rogan and all that other stuff. But yeah, gotcha. Interesting to me. Well, 42-year-old intern is pretty crazy.
He's not actually an intern. He was.
No, yeah.
Yeah, he was just. I'll get to that.
Okay.
So, let's just dive into it. We'll start with the first thing you saw, which was last week's Schmoedown, and we're recording this actually right before the Clark Wolf Sam Levine match, unfortunately, so we weren't able to comment on that on this podcast. But I'm certainly excited, and just.
Do you want to make a prediction?
Yeah, I'll make a prediction. Sam Levine is incredibly knowledgeable. He is similar to Scott Mantz. You're not going to understand anything that I'm saying, Jay.
Manty pants.
Aside from Scott Mantz, Sam Levine is also like a human IMDb. But I think I'm going to go Team Collider on this one. And Clark Wolf has proven that she is a contender. I think she is going straight for the belt to take it back from Dan Murrell. And I think Clark's going to win. And I haven't even really. I think she won the Twitter poll, so I think she's the favorite going into the Schmoedown today. I think it was 65-35. Is that math?
If you don't play "Hungry Like the Wolf" as her intro music, then none of this is even.
I think wouldn't that be purposeful. A copyright issue?
Does it matter? It's worth it. Okay, you do what's worth it for the sake of art.
You saw Clark Wolf, right? It's the host of Collider Nightmares.
I only listened to that.
Oh, you listened to
it.
Okay.
We could talk about that later.
Yeah, we'll talk about it. So anyway, let's speak on the Schmoedown from last week.
Okay.
And it was John Schnepp versus Kale Anonymous. Now, we sort of had these conversations throughout our group text throughout the week because me and you had a little back and forth, and I tried to give you a little bit of context, and I didn't know if it was better to do it there or on this podcast. But I guess let's just go show by show, and then you give your reaction to it, and I'll either tell you why you're wrong or tell you why I agree with you or whatever. But
okay.
So, how did you feel about last week's Schmoedown?
The Schmoedown was. It seemed to be a lot quicker than I expected it to be, for the sole fact that it was almost like they. Correct me if I'm wrong, because it was the first thing that I watched. But did they get very many questions right on that episode?
No.
It seemed like for being 30 minutes. I mean, when I sat down to watch it, I was like, Jesus Christ, 30 minutes of this? I mean, I thought it was going to be quick. I thought it was going to be a more quickly put together thing. I love the intros. I love the introduction.
So you thought the pace was quick, or the length of it was quick?
It didn't feel 30 minutes long. It felt. It was good. That's what I'm saying. It paced itself really well. The actual what was the ongoing joke of that episode?
Gene Hackman.
Gene Hackman,
yeah.
Which was hilarious that it actually came up as a potential multiple choice question later on. I mean, I really don't know much about the characters themselves.
So to speak on that, the Kale Anonymous guy, before the Schmoedown, I had zero idea who that guy was.
Okay.
So, like, he has not been, in the past year that I've been involved with this stuff, I've never heard him come up. Not even be mentioned. Like, I didn't know that he was, and, I go to Twitter, and he's a verified account and got, I think, hundreds of thousands of followers, but thousands of followers. So I was just like, okay, well, I've obviously been under a rock this whole time. I have no idea who it is. But he just came out of nowhere, and this happens on the Schmoedown sometimes. So there are huge episodes of the Schmoedown, like John Campion, Darren Murrell, I think those are names you've heard, and then Scott Mantz and John Roca. You've podcasted with Roca, so you know who he is. And there are huge matches like that. And then the Schnepp, which everybody knows Schnepp, but then the Schnepp and Anonymous, I mean, it wasn't something that I was really looking forward to.
Right.
And
it was an undercard fight, if you're familiar with boxing or fighting.
And only because, like, I'm a fan of Schnepp, and obviously I see him almost every day.
Right.
But
he's a big name to appear against the unknown.
But not even that. In the Schmoedown, he is not impressed. Like he has been lackluster in the Schmoedown, and he's not.
He's probably tired from all the friggin' Collider episodes he does. Jesus Christ,
he's tired of getting sweaty on Heroes. No,
good Lord.
It just wasn't. I love Snap, but when it comes to the Schmoedown, I wasn't really excited for the match. And I told you, I was like, this has probably been one of the more disappointing Schmoedowns that we have covered on this podcast, and from what I've seen, only because it was hard to find somebody to root for. I obviously was going for Snap because I knew who he was, but it was just disappointing.
See, it's interesting to me just because for the sole fact that I actually thought it was a pretty even matchup, despite the fact that they weren't really, getting a ton of the answers right. It was close enough to where there was some drama, and yeah, I mean, just the fact, at least for me, to start off the week with that, to see Schnepp there and to see him as such a recurring individual, I could see him developing some sort of following just based on that alone.
Right. So do you think, going back to the question of do you think this is something that can grow the channel, or do you think this is something that's there specifically for the fans that already exist? Maybe a little bit of both. Is there something that they could change to maybe improve on that?
That here's the biggest drawback for me. These types of shows, not just trivia shows, but game shows, sort of shows, exists on YouTube. One of my favorite ones, and in fact the one that I think has perfected the format, is the TFR, the Football Republic. It's a soccer channel, and they do a debate type of show. They give you a topic and people debate on it. And you would think that something as open-ended as that would be long-winded, etc. It's so quick and so to the point. I think the 30-minute video alone is hurting that format so much. I think it's hard for people because, I mean, if you just look at the trends of what people watch on YouTube, right? I mean, anything above 15 minutes, even that is pushing it, I think. So that's hurting it right there. The production quality, obviously fantastic. I think the actual meat of it is great, but yeah, the length of it is.
I think I definitely see what you're saying, but I think when you consider Christian's background with the WWE and what he's trying to accomplish with that, I don't know what the happy medium would be. Is there a part of the Schmoedown that you think could be cut off?
I think it could just be way tighter. It could be a much more well edited.
That might happen
piece.
Because I believe starting in August, Christian said that their Schmoedown's actually going to go to 2 a week.
Right.
So that might be something, because I think, let's say if we took your idea and the Schmoedown was now 15 minutes, it's not as much of an event that you're looking forward to week to week. And I think if they're really going to implement the 2 Schmoedowns a week, that could be something they could do, which is make it shorter. So,
well, one thing just right out of the gate, if the attempt is to get new listeners, or I'm in podcast mode, new viewers and listeners, whatever. The amount of stuff that they actually dedicate to the cutting promos and all that stuff, I understand that they're trying to build drama and a storyline in this, and I think that's great. But maybe the amount of time there, there's a place for that, in my opinion, on the SK podcast channel. Do you need to really muddy the waters on that main channel with all of that stuff? I don't know. I mean, where do those? I don't even know where those. Do they do?
Well, the Schmoedown belongs on Collider, right? So they might. So what are you saying?
All I'm saying is that all of that stuff in the beginning, if you're trying to leave that in for pure storyline,
just the shit talking kind of.
Yeah, all of that aesthetic. I mean, a new listener, I had no idea. I didn't know why I needed to care. And then maybe that's on me.
Really? I kind of thought it'd be the opposite. I thought that'd be a way to bring you in and sort of hype you up a little bit.
No, I mean, I didn't know who these people were.
That's true.
I didn't know. I just didn't know who they were. They could have been anybody to me. Now, coming on at the end of the week to see 2 individuals. Now, if it was let's say, Makuga and Schnepp, for instance, 2 people that have been on the content a lot, I probably would have cared more if it was towards the end of the week. And that could be specifically because of this exercise, but I do not think that the Schmoedown, as it stands right now, is a good vehicle to bring in new people. Maybe it could be, but I don't know if. I think it could be refined to be even better. If that makes sense.
Okay, cool. let's sort of package all of I call them the features of the week.
Okay.
When it comes to like heroes and nightmares and TV talk, top 10, we'll kind of like group all those together. And I don't know, how do you want to do it? Do you want to just talk about your favorites and we'll kind of go through all of them that way, or?
Yeah, we can.
What's the easiest way? I just figured clumping them together.
I don't think it's necessary to talk about each individual movie talk.
You can talk about your opinions on movie talk, but not every episode.
Right,
yeah.
absolutely.
We don't do that on this podcast. That would take way too long.
Yeah, so
movie talk being the headliner. Let's talk about movie talk, and then we'll talk about the features.
Well, before we get into it, let me just say this. It was good to do this week right now for me, and it was also a bad thing to do this right now because we're coming off of Comic-Con. And
I knew you were going to say
probably
this. I know where you're going.
Probably the biggest, maybe one of the biggest events I'm sure for this channel.
Yes.
And I think that's great because there's a lot of content that I'm definitely interested in and that I find fascinating that I want to know more about, especially as insiders. My issue with it is, Jesus Christ, I'm sick of talking about Comic-Con. I mean, it was recycled every single episode of every single show for the most part. And it was driving me a little crazy. And where I thought the payoff was going to be the Schmoes Know show.
The live show, yeah.
Yeah, and to a certain extent it was. But so we'll just get into
we'll talk about the Schmoes Know show.
We'll get
definitely.
into my general consensus on most of the movie talks.
I knew you were going to say that, and I didn't really know, like I asked you to do this exercise, and I didn't really know that they were going to cover it this much, because again, I wasn't a part of it last year when they did it, so I didn't know what all was involved with this. I knew that they were going to cover it over the weekend, and they did a great job, by the way, but we'll get into that a little bit later.
Yeah.
But I understand what you're saying. Like, it happened to be the week of where all of the content was more similar.
Yeah. Then
it might have
to give them the
otherwise.
benefit of the doubt. I get that. I understand that that's the case, and that's what we're going to get. It's a huge event.
Right.
Where I think, and this was my takeaway from everything, for almost everything except 2 shows that I watched this entire time. Now, I watched almost everything. The only thing I didn't get to watch was Jedi Council.
Okay.
And maybe the most recent movie talk. But my biggest, I love the production. I love how professional everything is. It looks amazing, and the content that we're getting is good. For me and my personal taste, I'm the type of person, I look for analysis. So I don't watch, I'd watch a Sports Center or something like that, but I get more from a show where there's more discussion based type of things, because there's so many different people, and there's so many, I don't know, every show has about, you would say, 3 to 4 people on it. I think there's so many different people to get opinions from, and because of the time constraints of 1 hour, we're never really getting a good discussion. We're always getting very brief things going on, and because of that, that's another reason why it feels very the same. And to be one other thing too.
Oh, he's pointing his finger at me. By the way,
I listened to the last Schmoeville that you did with the guy, I can't remember his name.
Last week's or the last episode
admin,
I did, Michael K.
With Michael K.
Yeah.
And I think this is a common thing. I'm saying common because I've only listened to one person that said it, and I feel this way too. But there is a little bit lack, I think, and people feel this, a lack of just, let's relax a little bit with the structure, because he did comment on that. He commented on things being a little bit relaxed, and we can get more into that later. I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Well, does that cover pretty much how you felt about movie talk? Did you see certain strengths, certain weaknesses, aside from the fact that just the format in general might not serve discussion? And by the way, that's something that, I don't know if you listened to this episode of Schmoeville. I don't know if I asked you to or not, but I think it could help if Christian decides to take the live show and do an hour daily. I think that would help involve more of a discussion. Obviously, I addressed this with Christian. I'd be a little bit worried about sort of the symbiotic relationship. Like you said, I don't want to watch an hour of movie talk and then an hour of the live show where they're talking about the exact same stuff, even if one is more discussion based than the other. So obviously you have that issue, but I think I think your answer lies in maybe a daily live show.
Yeah, quality over quantity sort of thing.
They could just talk about like one or two things for an hour, and they could have the entire panel there. So
we'll get more into that, I think, when we talk about the Schmoes Know show in general. Because, but to answer your question, that is kind of how I feel about movie talk in general. TV talk, that's more of my specialty. I'm a
television,
TV, I'm a TV guy. Again, we got a lot of the same sort of Comic-Con stuff,
right?
And they did get briefly into some show reviews, some episode reviews. That was okay, but still, again, the similar problem persisted.
The thing about TV talk is that, and that I believe this, I think it's probably my favorite show during the week now. I especially just love the panel, and I think it is more relaxed than movie talk. I think it's way more discussion based, honestly, because you kind of have like when movie talk, who's going to speak next. Like you're going to go to Christian first, then Mark, then Schnepp, move on. And with TV talk, it's sort of just kind of all over the place, but in a good way. I think it's just this episode was the problem because it was a lot of the format was especially different this week because it was entirely highs and lows, which is the format. That entire episode is actually just one section of a regular TV talk. So a standard TV talk is more along the lines of movie talk, but movie talk only has like two segments, right?
Right.
You just have like two main stories and then buy or sell and then mailbag.
I definitely liked the what's the best way to say this? I liked movie talk. It's nothing of this is that I didn't like it. I actually enjoyed all of the content. Most of these are constructive criticism / sort.
Right. That's why you're here.
Yeah. Somewhat even nitpicky crap. But TV talk was a step above because they would focus on specific topics for a longer period of time.
For sure. But like TV talk will do like the highs and lows. They have one section purely about comic book news. And then they'll usually put a pilot review or an episode review of some kind. I think this week they did Mr. Robot, and at the end they'll have like a pick of the week, and someone will suggest a show to binge, and so they have all these little things inserted that movie talk doesn't really do as well. But again, it's mainly just the people. I mean, did you like that panel? You had Makuga, and then David Griffin, and then Sasha Pearl Raver, who you've heard me talk about a lot, I'm sure too. I mean, and Sinead DeFries, who hosts. I mean, I just love all of those personalities.
I like all the personalities. I still think it's too many people.
Oh, really? Okay.
100%. And we'll get around to that when we talk about.
I think they complement each other so well. I don't know who I would want to take out. I wouldn't take out anybody.
Right.
But that's interesting. Okay. All right. What's next? What else? You got top 10 nightmares, heroes.
I'll talk briefly on nightmares.
Okay.
Because this was a show that I probably was the least looking forward to listen to / watch for the sole fact that it's just not my wheelhouse.
Right.
But it's actually probably had one of my favorite segments in it, and that was the entire discussion about the Blair Witch reveal at Comic-Con. I thought that was actually fascinating for people that don't know.
It was sort of like a J.J. Abrams kind of Cloverfield move.
Well,
in a way. It's just
it's not even
dropping it on us.
Yeah, and what was great about that episode was to hear their reaction to it there and the firsthand account of it. I thought that was fascinating, and the fact that one of the individuals on the show had actually already seen the movie and was having to keep it under wraps. I thought that was pretty fantastic.
I think that was Clark, though, wasn't it?
I'm not sure.
I think she was the one who's been talking about it for a while.
I'm not sure, but it was...
maybe it was Perry.
It was nice. It was cool. Unfortunately, I didn't get to finish the episode, but yeah, I like that whole bit at the very beginning.
The thing about Nightmares, and I agree with you, it's the one show that's put on there that's just not for me. But I mean, it's doing pretty well too. I mean, it's right up there with like TV talk, and it pretty much matches everything. Really, it's not like obviously lower than anything else. I think Jedi Council is probably the biggest draw, but I think it's just doing really well, and there are plenty of people. Actually, I think Heroes is the best now that I'm looking at the views right now. Heroes is killing it on here.
Will you answer a question for me just while you have that pulled up?
Yeah.
What's the shortest video just on that page? And I mean, you can just scroll through and look, but
just on what Collider does in general, like what's the shortest?
Just the page that you have pulled up. I'm just curious for what is the shortest.
On the homepage, not just in general.
Yeah, just the shortest video that's actually on there.
Well, they have all the Comic-Con coverage, which is just like few-minute interviews.
Okay.
But if that wasn't there, the shortest are the trailer reactions and the Collider news segments that they do.
Okay, I was just curious.
Yeah.
And how long are those?
I mean, just minutes long.
Okay. Yeah, just curious.
Yeah. Where were we going with that?
We were wrapping
Nightmares.
up. We're wrapping up Nightmares.
Okay.
I guess moving into Heroes.
Okay. So Heroes, I was really curious about how you felt about this because I love it. It's probably the longest show that they do throughout the week. They tend to go over a lot, but I mean that's the space right now, comic books. You've probably heard me talk a lot about this, and we have a friend of ours who is not passionate at all about John Schnepp. So I was wondering if you were going to take this bias into this show. So no, I didn't know how.
I do not pay attention to when you guys talk about this at all because I have, and it's actually a running joke because anytime somebody brings up names of people that don't sound familiar in the space, I get mad because they're not talking about Collider. Even though I have no frame of reference until now, I guess.
Right, but you like comic books and you're involved in our discussions.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up with them. There was a period of time where I couldn't care less for comic book movies and getting back into it.
So I think this was the show more than any of them that was mainly for you. What'd you think?
I could not have cared less about this episode, this show.
Oh, really? I didn't see it
because my problem with it is, again, I mean, we're dealing with Comic-Con. What day did this come out?
Heroes comes out on Wednesdays.
Okay, it came out on Wednesday. We had already had so much other content discussing this, not to mention the other additional content that I take in about movies and stuff in general, including your own and Chris Stuckman and all that. I was just so over some of the stuff that they were talking about. Like, I don't know how many times I need to hear somebody talk about how good they thought, with the exception of Mark, the Wonder Woman trailer was. Did you see Mark's freak out at Mom Movie Talk? Yeah, I did. And
Mark never.
He's a cool head. That. He's a cool head.
Yeah, he just never. He's always the one that like defends the fans. And, like Christian's the one that usually goes off, and Mark's the one that's more subdued when it comes to talking about the fans. I've never seen Mark do that.
Yeah,
it was pretty special.
And again, this is no slight. I feel bad for my opinion of Heroes because, again, I know I'm giving everything the benefit of the doubt, but that's where I'm like, let's go deeper into this. Don't just tell me how awesome you thought the trailer was. Let's get deeper.
Well, let's talk about the one thing that didn't involve Comic-Con at all.
Okay.
Which was top 10. So I was very curious to hear what you thought of this because you've actually podcasted with Roka.
Right.
You came on Film Beef, and we, you and Roka and Phil and I all talked about, and Will was there too. We all talked about Captain America: Civil War, and you had like a 2-hour conversation with John Roka. And that was sort of the Roka was the first person that I sort of was involved with in this space. Even before I started Schmoeville podcast, Roka was always nice enough to come on Film Beef. So I was especially interested to hear your thoughts on this show. And it's also just completely different than anything they do.
Right.
Like, totally different. When you talk about Heroes, you talk about Jedi Council, talk about TV Talk, it's a panel discussing news. This is completely different. What did you think?
Yeah. Aside from the fact that I've actually podcasted with Roka, take that aside. I mean, our interactions are completely and utterly limited. I don't really take in any additional content. This from him, this was by far my favorite of all of the content on there.
Wow. Really?
It wasn't even my favorite. It was like far and above. I will go back to this all the time.
That was sort of, and I can ask it right now, but that was the question I was going to ask, which was, and I might ask it again later on. Which of these will keep you?
Let's wait for that.
Okay, we'll wait for that then.
Let's wait for that. But this is one, just right off the bat, I will come back to constantly, and it's because of everything that I've talked about. One thing that played into its hands is it was the only thing that was different from Comic-Con.
Right.
But also, it had the least amount of people on the show. It only had 2 people, and they were actually getting in depth. Now, there were times when Rocco was feeling the length of time that they were given, and he was trying to rush things along, but for the most part,
and I actually think this was the shortest of the top 10 episodes that they've done so far.
Yeah.
Like right under an hour, and then this one was 50 minutes, so...
And I'm also, I can admit too, that this falls under the type of stuff that I enjoy. I like things that educate me, that give me a point of view, and the types of podcasts and YouTube videos I take in are shows similar to this. I'm a big fan of Joe Rogan. I'm a big fan of Mark Maron, like these things that dive in deep, and that's what this was to me.
And I think that's something that I've never really thought about, but the fact you can tell that this was already a pre-existing podcast.
Exactly.
And I know that it was developed for the Schmoes. It was on the SK podcast channel where Schmoeville is featured. I mean, it was there first, and they were there I believe they were on there for a year or so before the transition to Collider. And I've never really thought of this, but Collider could sort of be the house for other shows that already exist. Like,
well, yeah. I mean,
I've never considered that. I really haven't. Like, I always figured that the people that are in-house will just develop new content. And that's sort of what I feel like Screen Junkies, which I guess you know less about than Collider, but I feel like they kind of are doing it all. And they're obviously the bigger name to this. And that's sort of why we have these discussions, because we have this group over here, the Screen Junkies, who are clearly dominating, and we want to know why, even though we're Team Schmoes. So that's why we have these kind of conversations. So if they haven't already, and that was one thing I was afraid of when I was having these discussions on Schmoeville, was how many of the stuff that me and you come up with right here are stuff that Christian and Mark have already thought of.
Right,
and
absolutely.
It's already so.
Well, I can back all of this up right now. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, because I'm going to give it to you.
Give it to me.
If you look at trends in general in media, that is the number one thing that people have to start doing, is adopting pre-existing content. You look at music, they do that now. Nobody takes a chance on anybody new. You already have to have an album out. You have to have a fan base. Movies are doing that as well. You have to have content how many new scripts are being turned into movies these days? It just doesn't happen. So channels and networks like YouTube, it's next. Stop spending your money and stop taking chances on these things. Look for content that's already out there. There's a reason why football teams send out scouts to high schools. They don't spend money on an academy to do it right there to shoot steroids into their veins. It doesn't work like that.
Right.
So, I mean, that's you spend your time wisely. That's all I'm going to say.
So basically, you're telling every creator out there, every aspiring creator, create your own podcast, and then someone will find you.
100%.
That's how you want to do it?
Yeah.
That's your way to sort of infiltrate sort of these bigger things.
Yeah, the biggest problem I have, and I know people, I have friends that live out in California where a lot of things get made. The problem with California and Hollywood and LA is that they forget that sometimes the rest of the world exists, and that's a huge issue. And that there are people everywhere creating these things, and they like to operate inside their own bubble. So that's all, and that really, honestly, that doesn't have anything specifically to do with Schmoes, because they have something that works.
Right.
This is like, I don't know if I'm performing Inception right now on them, like, and trying to plant. No, that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to say that that's one of the benefits to top 10. Right. That's why that works. Bringing it back around.
Unfortunately, I think top 10. I mean, it's up there with other things, but it's also just, I don't know, it's not also taking off. You know what I mean? Like, I totally, like, I love the show. And I also think it's, like, I love the things that are on here that teach me about movies that I don't know. Like, that's why Movie Talk is less and less on my priority list, because it's telling me things I already know about the daily movie news. So top 10 is, like, more for me as well.
It is a great podcast. I mean, that's how I took this in. I listened to it. It was incredible. And I don't know, but it goes again to say that a lot of these don't make sense to work on YouTube. They're an hour long, right? You know what I mean? I mean, to a certain extent it does, but I don't know. It was my favorite. I'm sticking with it.
So
I'm buying it.
I guess that kind of wraps up all this stuff in Collider. So again, to ask the question, is there anything that we haven't mentioned so far? Like, do you have any ideas as to how they can grow the channel. One of them is just because YouTube is so widespread, and I made this point on other episodes. YouTube is so widespread that I think putting out little nuggets of things, and that's why I think Collider News is so important, because they have a host, they tell a story, it's extremely professional, and depending on the headline, it's gonna find an audience,
right?
Because it depends entirely on the trends, the current trends on YouTube and movie news, etc. So I feel like planting seeds out there for YouTube for random people to find, to sort of like make everything else, sort of how we talked about how the live show is the one thing you find when you're there. Once you're there, you got to plant seeds across YouTube to get people to your channel, and I think Collider News is like that. Now the problem with Collider News is that it's the most unique thing on this channel, and I'll show you what it's like after we get off here, but it's extremely produced. It looks like something you'd see on do you remember how MTV News is?
Yes.
Where it was like it was like 2 minutes at the end of an episode of a show that you were watching, and then Sway comes on and reports the news.
Yep.
And
I'm already how long are those episodes typically?
Like 2 minutes.
Yeah, so I'm already familiar with this, because just to give a tiny bit of background, for everything that Ryan is talking about, being a movie guy, I'm the exact same with music. I take in Complex content all the time. Complex, a parent company of Collider and Schmoes.
And you were intrigued when they bought Collider.
I already knew who they were.
Yeah.
And if you look, first of all, Complex, especially Complex Music and all that, they don't even have anything like Collider. This community, nothing like this community really exists.
For music.
Well, for music or for a lot of things. I mean, there's some stuff for comics. There's some stuff for video games, I think. But, yeah.
Video games is probably the biggest sector.
Right, of course. So, Complex News for music, I mean, they get a ton of hits and stuff like that.
Gotcha. Okay.
And it's the exact same. It's
Gotcha.
the exact, very quick, one guy standing in front of a green screen talking about some blurb of news, and then that's it.
Right. Sorry, I rambled a little bit, but
okay.
Did you have any like new ideas that we haven't come up with yet that might, like, outside the box, maybe things you've seen in the soccer space or music space that could work to grow Collider or the Schmoes channels before we move into the live show?
It's just about brevity, man. I like the idea of Sports Center for movies, and I think that idea has a place and it has a home that can stick and last. But if you look at what most great eye-catching content on YouTube is, it's things that are brief. It's about brevity. And I mean, I don't know who's going to listen to this from the Collider space.
Christian definitely will.
Okay, go and check out the Football Republic. The way that they do their discussions is perfect. It's not even anywhere near produced as Schmoes stuff and Collider stuff is at all, but it's perfect, and it gets the job done for an incredibly niche community.
And you actually brought this to my attention before I was able to read it on Twitter, but I think Christian is also starting to transition in his mindset. Because you were the one who told me on Twitter, like, hey, did you know Christian mentioned making Movie Talk shorter?
Yeah.
And I had noticed it. They kind of take less Twitter questions at the end now.
Well, that for the sake of a short discussion, that actually goes completely against my belief. Like, I want to see YouTube produce longer content. That's actually a criticism that I have. But right now, for the sake of growing, I think that all of the stuff that they have has a place, and the length of it has a place.
Yeah, you were just speaking about the amount of discussion.
Yeah, I am, but it's. I'm not saying that hour-long shows don't belong on YouTube at all.
Okay.
But the way to get new people that's how I freaking watch a stupid shoe YouTube channel.
Yes, he does.
I don't even care that much about shoes, but I watched like a 3-minute video and it made me excited, and I subscribed to this dude talking about shoes. I watch Mojo videos, Mojo countdowns.
Watch Mojo? Me too.
I go down a wormhole about that. It's just, you just got to get people's attention.
Screen Rant also does that very, very well. They do a daily countdown of something. And it's sort of like a shortened version of Top 10.
Just throwing a line out there, hoping somebody bites. Really?
Yeah, definitely, for sure. Okay, so are you ready for me to ask the question yet? What was the question that you made me skip?
It was, am I going to keep watching?
Yes. Now, we've done this experiment. We're going to talk about the live show in a minute, but talking about Collider, is there anything that will keep you coming back, or are you planning on sticking with maybe another week that isn't just about Comic-Con?
I want to try it one more time with all of this stuff without Comic-Con, just to give it a fresh take. I will say one of the smartest things that they do is put these episodes out as podcasts, because I mean, how many episodes did I have to watch of content? There was a lot. There was a lot of stuff.
It's quite a bit.
It's a lot of hours.
Maybe almost 10.
A lot of hours, and I don't have that much time in my personal life to watch that type of stuff.
Quit playing Pokemon Go.
So I listen to a lot of these at work, which I think is fantastic. So that's something I think they definitely need to continue doing. As it stands right now, man, look, I was waiting for this question. Here's my response to this. Me being an extremely casual movie lover, not a hardcore fan, which I think is niche. It's a niche thing to be. I get my movie news from sources already. There are people, you and your podcast, Film Beef, as well as Chris Stuckman. That's where I get my reviews, again, along with you. That's where that is for me.
Okay.
That's what I enjoy listening to. I like Mark and I like Christian a lot as characters, or not as characters, but as individuals. I like their personalities a lot. As soon as they can offer me a more in-depth discussion and showcase more of themselves, and I know that might sound weird, but when they can showcase more of themselves, that's when I'm going to buy into this 100%. Mark and Christian together is the least amount of things that happen with this whole with Collider and with Schmoes Knows. Their reviews together is the thing that they do the absolute least of. Does that make sense?
No.
Okay. They do all of these shows. They do them together, but it's always with other people.
Right. Oh, you're saying, they spend the least amount of time just Christian and Mark in chairs together.
Yeah. Or even bringing on one other person. So
you're suggesting maybe something like top 10, but for Christian and Mark only.
This is Schmoeville. This is about the Schmoes.
This is Schmoeville.
And if I'm talking specifically about Mark and Christian, that's, if you want people to fall in love with Mark and Christian, which you obviously are, you have a tattoo of them, and a picture framed with you, and what's all that white stuff? Never mind.
So stupid.
If you want people to fall in love with them, you got to get them to fall in love with their personalities, and you can do that by the reviews, but it's just not, it's almost not enough. Like,
okay, interesting.
This is not enough for me.
I like that point. Good point. So you're going to give it another week?
I am definitely going to give it another week. And just because you're involved with them, and just because they get so involved with their fans, I can't think of anybody that has developed this much stuff and communication with their fans. I think it's amazing.
It's out of.
I love
crazy.
it. That is what the internet is supposed to be, and that is what new media is supposed to be.
They're extremely passionate about their fans.
Absolutely, and I think that is enough. Me understanding that is enough for me to continue at least keeping my ear to the ground with them.
Yeah. So do you think this, I don't think I've ever asked this or considered this before, but can their content make someone like a diehard movie fan? Like can someone,
absolutely,
can someone who like their favorite movie is Colin Farrell's SWAT and they own I just picked a random movie, it's on my shelf over there, someone like just buys random movies that they like, maybe once a year they go to the theater, don't really think about movies, can they come across this and become intrigued about the movie space?
Is it possible? I think it's 100% possible, but you've been trying to convert me for the last 3 years to be a passionate movie fan for whatever reason.
But I need you to be like me.
But the thing that gets me into it are these discussions when we talk about
Star
Wars
we're starting
versus
we're starting to rhyme
Star
here.
Trek.
I get your point. I'm sorry.
Yeah. You know the answers to these questions, Luke.
Let's get into the live show, and then we'll wrap this up. So, this was
for the record. I'm a very popular man. Do you see how many likes I'm getting right here on Instagram? Look at this.
Okay. Stop. This is about the Schmoes, not your Instagram life.
I'm just saying. I'm an important person.
This is the big daddy of them all. This was the grand finale of the week. This is the one that is strictly for the fans. what are some of your first impressions, your overall thoughts of the show, and then we'll dig a little bit deeper.
2 hours is very long, but that's okay. I also listen to a 3-hour podcast multiple times a week with Rogan, and I love if we're gonna review the movie reviewers, I love the tone of the show.
Yeah,
I love how laid back it is. It has far more, probably because of the length, it has far more discussion in it. I love the behind the scenes type of stuff that we got of Comic-Con at the very beginning. I loved how involved with the fans they are. I loved all of that stuff. I loved that it was a little bit more loose. You know, there's a lot of cursing. There was alcohol being consumed. I like all of that. The only thing that was rough for me was how many people are on it. I understand why there's as many people as there are on it. I understand that that's great for the fans. For me, as a first-time viewer of the entire thing, it was like, there's so many people.
So to give you more context, basically you saw the backbone of the show. That's what we expect every week, is all these characters coming in and out. It's more segmented usually. Like Brett Sheridan, for example, has this segment called Brett to the Future, which is essentially...
I've seen that before.
Oh, you have seen it?
Yeah.
Basically trying to catch Brett up on movies that he's missed. So we have that, and then Sasha Pearl Raver's usually at the table. She does indie picks to inform everyone about the indie movies that they haven't touched on at all throughout the week on Movie Talk or what have you. It's more of that, and then you have even like larger than life characters, which they talked about Finstock a lot last night, and I was really disappointed that you didn't get to see this character, because he is we talked about how special it is that Christian implements these like WWE sort of techniques into the Schmoes Know show. This guy is out of his mind. He is a womanizer. He wears a beard mask, like a knitted beard mask, and he is awesome. And they sort of shed a light on what he's like by talking about him last night, but I really wish you could have seen it.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of things that were missing last night, and you know, to be honest, to do the more traditional Schmoeville sort of live show recap that we do on here, I wasn't really a fan of this episode.
Really?
Like the backbone is there. The people were there that I love, but I'm finally gonna agree with you that I'm over Comic-Con. Right. And it's funny because Christian, I believe it was Christian who got upset on Movie Talk one day this week about people asking, why are you blowing up my YouTube feed with Comic-Con videos? I'm not complaining about the Comic-Con coverage.
Right.
I'm complaining that it's now the Thursday after, and it was a whole week after the start of Comic-Con, and we were just listening to people talk about, and he even addressed it. He's like, I'm sure people are blowing up the chat. Like, why do I want to listen? I was one of those people. I wasn't in the chat, but I was over Comic-Con already. I didn't care to hear about people just talking about partying at Comic-Con.
See, okay. I hear you loud and clear, obviously, because we've already discussed this a little bit, but I actually didn't mind it so much, again, and it might have just been because we were getting this sort of conversation that I like to hear. It was a little rough because there were so many people in the room going back and forth. Here's my story, here's my story, here's my story. But I thought it was a breath of fresh air to actually get a little bit of stuff behind the scenes, to see how hectic it is. I felt exhausted just listening to those stories about the running around. And it reminded me of going to like a festival or working at a festival or being a band at a festival. Warped Tour. Well, I've never played Warped Tour, but
not played Warped Tour, but you've been there.
Yeah, I mean, just setting all that stuff up and covering it. I'm sure I thought that was a nice peek and a nice window into all of that. Yeah, I don't know. My favorite part of the episode that I thought was fucking hilarious. I mean, the greatest thing that happened was when, actually two things. First of all, let me just address this. I love TV.
Yes.
And it's a huge discussion that we won't get into, could be made of why TV should be held in a higher regard than movies.
We don't talk about TVs or movies on this podcast.
I understand that. But
that disclaimer exists on every episode.
Christian could not give two shits about TV. In fact, when they were talking about Mr. Robot, my beloved Mr. Robot, he was literally yawning. I mean, go back and watch it. He literally yawned while they were talking about Mr. Robot, and I was so furious.
So furious?
Furious.
I thought that was your favorite thing, but it made you mad?
Well, no, that wasn't my favorite thing.
Oh, that was
I wanted to address that first. But
that is a good point. That's what's
Christian
funny.
is the Phil of Collider. He's not watching. He's not watching Mr. Robot.
No one understands those references.
I understand.
You're talking about film beef.
I understand, but anybody that watches that show knows how amazing it has been, and maybe still is. That's beside the point.
What's your next favorite thing?
Hang on. No, Christian. We'll get into that in a second. No, the problem is, does he not watch TV?
He watches some. He watches Thrones. He watches Walking Dead. He doesn't have. I don't think he has any time to watch TV.
That's like
Jesus
saying
Christ.
I listen to punk music and listen to Blink-182 and Green Day. That's not punk music. Those are just the ones everybody knows.
Well, he can answer it better than I can. He loved 11/22/63.
I'm just giving him shit. But that's what happens when you yawn for my favorite TV show.
Okay.
The other part that I thought was hilarious, and the reason why I called you Christian, was because there was a point where he kind of got the sense. He kind of got the sense that people were rambling a little bit, and he was trying to keep the show together.
Right.
And Mark absolutely took the piss, and was like, no, wait a second, and started asking people questions that Mark didn't care about. He was asking people about their accommodations for Comic-Con.
Right.
And Mark didn't care. He didn't care. He was just trying to piss off Christian.
You're right.
And it was very clear. Then it was handled very well and very funny. And that was so funny to me, because as a content producer myself, I've been on the end of that. We were trying to keep things in a straight line.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. There's a few things that I wish you had more context of. Again, like to speak on like JTE was the bald guy with the backwards hat, talking about the Finstock matchup and stuff. He's become like the heel of Schmoes Know. Like he's the guy that
I felt bad for him. I felt like they were picking on him.
They always pick on him.
Okay, that's fine.
He well, I was gonna compare him to somebody, but we'll get to that. Well, I'll say that off air. But I wish you saw more of that. I enjoyed that part of it, because that's again part of the backbone of the Schmoes Know show. There's always some kind of lead up into something else, some kind of drama that's kind of being produced. So they were trying to amp that up, and those are the things that I loved about the show. But again, I wish you saw like the Bread to the Future and all that kind of stuff. I want to talk about, just briefly, and I know you can't touch on this, but just congratulations to my boy Ace, who has been on Film Beef. He's been on this episode. He's a great guy.
Is he the guy that lied?
No.
Oh, who's that?
Ace is the guy who was at the table talking about TV.
I know who he is.
Wait, what?
Was he the guy that lied about living in L.A.?
No, that was JTE.
Okay.
The guy you felt sorry for.
No,
Ace was the intern with RB3 up until last night, where he got promoted, and I don't know if it was because of how well he handled the Comic-Con coverage, because Ace killed it at Comic-Con this week. He did a great job. I mean, he was in charge of the TV content over the weekend. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to give a shout out to Ace. And also, Copster came on. Copster was the guy who sat in Christian's lap and was getting poked.
Yep. He's a guy on the commercial breaks, too.
Yeah. He's the associate producer up until last night, where Christian just dropped that he's now the producer of the show. I don't know if that was an actual promotion, because Miri, who actually produces, she was not there last night. So I don't know if he was saying that because Copster took the reins for the night, or if he was actually promoted. But if that's true, and it's been awesome to see the past year or so, well, not a year for Schmoes. It's been awesome to see Copster and Ace sort of move up in the ranks for Schmoes. So,
well, so they did a Killing Joke review on the channel, and I actually watched that because
the review itself.
Yeah, I watched the review because you guys were going to review it, and I wanted to get some additional context beforehand. I actually liked the discussion they got into that. It seemed like everybody was really on board. It bummed me out when Christian said, and I have a quote, "Let's move on from Killing Joke. We have a lot to cover." Which was now I was paying more attention to the show, closer, because this is why I came on here to talk about it.
Right.
And I have a little bit of a microscope, but I was like, man, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Let's talk about it more. Because there's people, obviously,
I think, by the way, we're at the point where, like, this was over an hour into the show. Like, I felt like they had so much going into last night's episode. They had so much shit they wanted to talk about, and it just ran way too long.
The first line I wrote was party talk / crew behind the scenes. The next line, the second line, is TV talk / quick killing joke discussion, and that was like an hour into it, and that's only the second note that I wrote.
Yeah, I feel like they probably had too much going into the episode to discuss.
Yeah,
and
I get it.
I'm kind of disappointed that they didn't touch on. It could have been a balance of sort of what else haven't we talked about with Comic-Con.
That's the key to all of this.
I'm like,
a balance.
And that's the thing is, like, we saw the coverage from the panels, but even though it wasn't really for me, I think if they had balanced with the more behind the scenes stuff, so like with Michael Tabb at the beginning, the partying stuff, and sort of what it was like to live in the. I saw on Instagram where Campia got him a mansion. Like, if they had talked more about partying and the daddy don't slap me stuff that they did, that was great, by the way. I know you didn't really have an opinion on it. It's just more special to me. It looked like a video.
Yeah, it just looked like
it's more special to me because I know the people.
It looked like an inside joke between friends video, which is what it was.
Well, we watched the first edition before this, so
yeah,
you didn't have context.
It looked like a video that I would send you on Snapchat.
Yeah, that's fair.
That's what it is. It shows like a big group text.
That's true. Yeah, you're right. I think if we had balanced into more of like the behind the scenes of what they did, and then talked more about what they usually talk about with the segments, and I love the inside joke that they wouldn't let Brett talk, by the way. When Tiffany came on and took Brett's chair, that was hilarious. I wish it balanced. Maybe, they could have talked about Bourne, for example. I mean, the fact that Jason Bourne was coming out
next week. Yeah.
I mean, Jason Bourne coming out, for me, I think it's huge.
Yeah.
That this movie even exists, let alone, I mean, usually they do a preview of the big movie coming out this week. So
Suicide Squad next week.
I was gonna say, it's disappointing that they skipped over Bourne, and I'm just gonna get Suicide Squad next week, which is fine. But I feel like that would have been a better show for me personally. But whatever. Anyway, so just a shout out again to everyone who worked hard on creating the content that you gave us during Comic-Con. It really made me feel like I was there. So I appreciate all the work, and you guys apparently exhausted yourselves. So thank you for doing that. It really shows how much you care about your fans. So I want to know what you think, and this will sort of be the last thing that we touch on. Did you catch the very end of the episode where Christian invited that fan on?
I did see that. He was very shiny.
What'd you think of what'd you think of the move, like inviting a fan on to sit in and watch the show? I mean, sort of I don't know, I just think, again, that touches on how involved they are with their fans, and I just thought it was really cool that they did that.
I mean, I think it's great. I think it's great because of how you can tell that this is a very tightly interwoven production. There's a lot of moving parts and pieces to put all this together, and to take the time. I mean, I couldn't even imagine to have all the stuff on the plate that Christian and Mark have in general, let alone other people. So to do that is a huge move. I mean, but to be honest, with new media like this, that's almost bare minimum. You've got to have good, and they're doing it great. You've got to have good communication with your fan base.
Something that blows my mind is that Christian was at Comic-Con for Fandango, and Mark was there. Yeah. Mark was there for Comic-Con HQ, which is John Campia's new joint. So it was like all the people had to rise up and take
without
charge.
Mommy and Daddy being on?
And Mark Riley, who is a producer he was on Nightmares panel. Oh, he was on last night manning the computer and those giveaways and stuff. He was in charge of the Collider stuff with Dennis, and that's when like the Wanger crew, which is like Ace and all those guys, came up, and David Griffin, all those people were in charge of the Schmoes Know content. So I'm really impressed with how well they covered everything. So huge thank you to all of that. We appreciate it. But I'm also exhausted. So I can't wait to get into more of a traditional week in Schmoes. And sorry to be the downer if it felt like I was being that way, but Can't win them all.
Yeah, well, I mean, it just goes to show, like, I listened to it before we were doing this, but I listened back to when Christian came on this podcast. He was very adamant, very transparent about the fact that I think the timestamp on it is like 1630 because I was going to send it to you, but I mean, he specifically addresses the fact of the need to grow the channel, that he thinks they should have 1 million subscribers to this point. And he's not outside the realm of possibility. I mean, it's a big operation with a lot of people relying on it. And these types of discussions need to be had. And sometimes they're hard to be had internally because so many people are so close to it that it's important to have these types of discussions externally. So, yeah, I hope this didn't come across negative in any way because, I mean, look.
No, you provided insight that I could not have gotten elsewhere.
Yeah. Okay.
So
good.
This is why you were here. And
this is with a very intense microscope that I've given this, given my presence as a present to you.
Right. I'm glad you brought up the subscription count, by the way. Before we get off here, I was going to make it a point to say, I think the last time I checked the subscription count for Collider and Schmoes was 2 or 3 weeks ago when I last did a podcast, or maybe it was shortly after when I had Christian on, because we were talking about how they pretty much share the same fans. And I think at the time they were both just barely above 260,000 followers, both of them. And I think the Schmoes got up to, right now as it stands, they are at 264,000, and Collider has jumped up like almost 10,000 subscribers more.
Right.
So I find that interesting. I'm not sure what to make of it yet, but I think this was a huge week for Collider. So whether I liked it or not, what they did at Comic-Con worked.
Oh yeah. This has got to be Super Bowl.
Yeah.
For them.
Yeah.
Has to be.
So anyway, I'll just wrap it up there because you guys have listened to this podcast for long enough, and now you just want to get to the footage.
I got it. Got the joke.
You get it?
Of course I do.
Now you're in on the inside jokes with the Schmoes.
I guess I am.
Me and you can quote that
now I can,
for the rest of our lives.
Now I can borrow that picture of Mark that you have up on your wall.
Yeah.
With all those, whatever the stains are.
Stop. This is a family show. Actually, I have no knowledge of who listens to this. Anyway, let's wrap it up. Look, like I said, that's why you were here. You gave us an insight that I couldn't get elsewhere. I greatly appreciate you coming on, taking all the time to listen or watch this content. Now you know what I go through every week to prepare for this podcast.
It's a lot of fucking work.
Yeah. But I always appreciate what they do for us, and I appreciate you coming on and providing this, and I hope they appreciate it too. I hope that I get a text from Christian talking about some of the things that we talked about here. So anyway, thank you for coming on, Jay. Do you have anything you want to plug before we get out of here?
Yeah, I talked about it a little bit, but I have a music podcast where we review albums and discuss music. It's called In the Galaxy. You can find it wherever podcasts are found. You can also follow us on social media at In the Galaxy Podcast on Instagram and at In the Galaxy Pod on Twitter. Also, I'm about to be launching a sort of a spinoff from that podcast. It's called Creative Control. I've been doing it for a while. Ryan comes on once a month, and we talk about just creative issues that people go through. If you're a aspiring YouTuber, an aspiring podcaster, maybe you're a filmmaker, graphic designer, videographer, whatever it is, if you have issues that you're going through as a creative individual, you can come on the podcast and talk about it. You can listen to other people talk about their issues to know that you're not alone in that. My name is Jaye Williams, J to the A to the Y to the E. I have an E on it. My mom really fucked me over when she did that, but that's okay because it makes me one of a kind. You can find me at Jaye Williams on Instagram and Twitter. And thank you, Ryan, for having me on. And thank you, Schmoes.
Goodness. On the creative control that we've done for the In the Galaxy feed lately, it's pretty well documented what I've gone through, especially here on Schmoeville. You get to hear a side of me in Schmoeville that you don't hear on here.
Yeah, it's a chronicle of your...
It's basically, how it came to be, what it's like to do this as a fan, and so...
Yeah, you get to hear how much of a whiny bitch he is.
Stop.
Okay. Well.
You can follow me on Twitter at FilmBeefSnell. I love engaging with you guys. I'm new to it, so there might be some weird sort of interactions between us, but please, by all means... come hang out with me on Twitter and talk about whatever you want to talk about. I definitely appreciate it. If you didn't know, this is on the Schmoes Know podcast feed. So go subscribe there, and you'll get every Schmoeville episode there, of course, with the live show and the Harloff podcast and everything else. And if you're already listening to that there, just know that we're also on the SK Podcast YouTube channel. So you can listen to us however you want. I love engaging with you guys there too. If you feel free to comment and talk about what we talked about here, I greatly appreciate it. You can also find me on the Film Beef podcast. We review movies, we recap TV shows like Mr. Robot, and a few special things here and there, and you can find all of that on the Film Beef podcast feed on iTunes, Stitcher, whatever, or the YouTube channel. I greatly appreciate it. I'm glad to be back after our 1-week hiatus. Paul Wolf, I believe, is making his return next weekend. Now, I have a different job with a different schedule, so Schmoeville isn't always consistently being recorded on Friday mornings. But Paul and I will be working it out, and he should be making a grand return to the Schmoeville podcast. So we're definitely happy to have him back. So be on the lookout. Thank you, Schmoeville. We'll see you later.